initially it was a lot of, hey, I'm one step away from 301, like they're passing things directly to me. But as time goes on, it's like, okay, so I see some patrol officer, in the police department who needs access to cases because it's all becoming part of what they do now, right? That they're responding to this stuff and they're boots on the ground. They see things that the rest of us don't see sitting in town hall. So that's been a very different, all of a sudden police officers are chatting on a permitting case or something like that. Who knows what's happening out there? But it's just very interesting that kind of transformation, that knowledge across the organization is happening. Yeah, and as far as working, we've tweaked. Yeah, oh yeah. So we're on our probably 4th or 5th iteration of a case intake page. We're constantly trying to reinvent how that works to get better information to our citizen advocates. They're our call takers. We call them citizen advocates. Getting that information to them so they can make better decisions and help the citizen better. So
that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Hey, Stephanie, with Wilmington, I was going to ask about some of the benefits you've seen. I mean, Derek's mentioned a few things around like chat, but what are some of the other benefits that you've seen from moving from report it, resolve it forms to Salesforce to capture some of those citizen requests?
I mean, for starters, it was expanding beyond public works. So now we can, we have multiple departments on it now, pretty much any department that is public facing. We have, especially in our finance department. So most of our requests are related to public works or related to finance. We have drastically reduced call times into finance. We have drastically reduced the time it takes to actually get information or pay a bill. And on top of that, we've kind of changed our processes as well. So it used to be that anytime you would call finance, you would have a call with a finance call. Sorry. Anytime you would call the finance call center, they would take any of the more difficult to resolve cases. So anything that required research, anything that required a little bit more looking into, a little bit more specialized knowledge, they would go directly to the call center, and literally anybody who could handle it would pick up the phone. And sometimes they would also be handling, people coming into the office at the same time. Now with Salesforce, they can get those they get tickets, they get cases, they can triage, they can hand them off to the best person to handle the case, as opposed to just getting them all piled on at once and maybe not getting the best person. So we had really long queue times, we had a high abandonment rate, and we've essentially eliminated those by being able to just take the issue at the call center, hand it off to finance, and then they can triage and look at it in an appropriate time. So we've managed customer expectations on top of that. Also, the best part really has been just eliminating the reliance on anecdotal evidence. So anytime a city council member calls and says, this citizen has been calling multiple times, or this issue is a real problem, we can look at it and say, okay, this person has only called once, or this person has never called 311. Or at the same time, if they think an issue like abandoned vehicles or, an issue is, when they find something that they think is a really big deal, we can say, actually, most citizen requests are related to special pickups, things like that. And actually the issue that you're really concerned about only gets maybe, 5 or 10 calls a month. So we can kind of prioritize our efforts and our funding toward the issues that citizens really care about, as opposed to what, the loudest voices in the crowd really feel are important.
Wow, having that data to back it up. You also mentioned, finance, and because you have the water aspect as well. You were telling me a story yesterday or 2 days ago around water main breaks and how folks would be really concerned their bill's going to go up. Can you tell about how you kind of resolve some of those challenges for citizens and concerns?
As our colleagues in Cary mentioned, city government is heavily siloed. People in finance may not know what's going on in public works. People in parks do not know what's happening in L&I. It's and we have customer service, groups in each of these departments, and they may or may not know that, in finance, you may not know that L&I just sent out a mailing about business permits, things like that. So we've put together a message board so that every department in our call center, our call center and every department that's public facing can message each other when, say, we have an issue or something that might impact every department. So we had a water main break recently, and our great customer service supervisor in Public Works was able to immediately post to it and say, hey, we have a water main break. It will be solved in about 2 to 3 hours. When people call, and they'll know about it. And so we had finance, we had Randstad, we had Public Works. Everybody knew that this issue was happening. So it wasn't, oh, I need to look into that. It was like, no, this will be solved in a couple of hours. This will not be reflected in your water bill. We were able to centralize our messaging a little bit better so that we look like a unified organization rather than multi-headed Hydra, which is really actually what we are. So
that's amazing. I love that story. That's so great. I'm going to switch back to Carrie with Carolyn. How do you know what you've started is working? What are some of the signs that you're seeing that show you that the investment is paying off?
Yeah, I think the ability to have more one-touch resolution. So the ideal version of a citizen advocate for us and Carrie is that they're helping citizens with their problems from cradle to grave. And so you call one person, you get one person to kind of steer you through the halls of town hall and help you get right back out the door into whatever you were doing. And so the more we see us doing, being able to offer that level of service and that satisfaction rate, that's been really important. I think another thing that's very internally focused is just having information outside of our inboxes and into a centralized system where we're all speaking the same words, we're all relaying the same information, and maybe even more importantly, knowing what not to say and being comfortable saying that's something we can't handle right now or serve you right now, but here's what we do know. And I think the ability to, as we work with different subject matter experts, to help work alongside of them to revamp or digitize their processes to make their maybe very technical part of their job more efficient and streamlined, that ultimately helps all of us in the greater, has been really satisfying too.
That's awesome. Really appreciate that. I'm going to ask about lessons learned, and then we're going to talk about funding. So Derek from Wilmington, I'm curious if you have any lessons learned from going through this transformation and anything that you would tell, other cities that are thinking about doing something like this.
Sure. There's always lessons to be learned. Wilmington has actually, from what I can see, 180-degree transformation. There's always going to be things that's needed to be added on. And every day we're always looking at what we can do to make it better. We're actually thinking about some things that we can add that will actually make the day-to-day actually more easier for the people working in the call center, and also for the people that's calling in and requesting services or requesting public works to take care of different issues that may have arisen. So I mean, it's ever changing, and it's amazing. And like Stephanie stated, that we are innovative, and I'm glad that I'm able to sit here in Public Works and be a part of that innovation. So anyone is looking into doing this, I'm suggesting you strongly consider it and give it a go.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Derek. Hey, Stephanie, over to you. I was curious about your lessons learned. I loved what you mentioned about having access to data. Has that, what have you learned from actually being able to see the data, aside from being able to give really key, combat the anecdotes, as you mentioned? Any other lessons learned from your perspective?
I would say to anybody who is looking at instituting this from the beginning, I would point to the importance of having a data manager, somebody who can guide the process from the beginning, who can speak the language that that your developers speak, but also can speak the language that the city speaks, so that they can kind of work as an intermediary there. So when you're creating categories, you know the information that you're going to want to get from it. So, when you have when you're actually looking at your data later on, you're able to analyze it in a way that makes sense to you. So, not having a general inquiry category that's unique to each area that you want it to be, as opposed to, having a general service area and then one general inquiry. When you're looking at your data later on, having too many overlapping categories or having too many blank categories can make things difficult when you're analyzing your data. That's a bit wonky, I know, but it's something you really need to think about when you're setting up a system like this, is when you're creating categories, how they're going to look when you analyze the data later on. And secondly, having somebody to guide the process of linking your system to the other systems that you use. Mm-hmm. So linking, say, Salesforce to your ERP, or linking it to whatever, like Esri or whatever mapping system you use, things like that, where you can help ensure a smooth transition between the two systems so that they work together and you're continuing to get the data that you need. So that would be my advice as
That's
far
great.
as moving forward with a system like this. But yeah, it is just from having the data, like we went from having no data to having a wealth of data, and it has been fantastic. We know what our biggest problems are. Well, we know what our biggest areas, we know what our constituents care about, and we know what we need to improve, those two things, being able to back both of those up with data has been revolutionary.
That's amazing. I really love the advice. First of all, you have the best title. Best practices are in your title. But that's such a good point of thinking about the end in mind. What reports do we need at the end of this? And that should go into the way that you design it. And then, yeah, every city's made investments in different technology and software. So how can you make sure that you're bringing the power of all of those together in something like a Salesforce, or vice versa, or pushing it to other systems that are working there? And I really appreciate you sharing, having the water department, that is a whole billing finance, like that's a whole different spin on this experience. So
it's huge.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so lessons learned. Let's keep going with this theme. Carolyn, any lessons learned or advice you would give?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'll give some, and then definitely invite Wilson to unmute and add to this as well. But a huge lesson learned is just that things take time, quite simply, that there's a discovery period and then there's another discovery period to discover what you didn't even know was discoverable. We embarked on 311 starting in probably 2017, 2018. But prior to that, there was a work group, a cross-departmental group that wasn't focused on 311 per se, but was looking for a singular solution to solve many different departments' business process needs. And so when we had this shift to focusing it more, or thinking more about it as a 311 solution, even within there, being able to pilot things and iterate and grow your vision based on what you've learned without disrupting your ultimate output of service was just really challenging and also very fruitful. And so when you think you can accomplish something in 6 months, add an extra 3 months to it. And the world's not going to end, right? People don't know that. And if you finish still in 6 months, you look even better. So we're being respectful that we set our own deadlines, and that it's okay to fail, and that in all of those failures, there are opportunities to create something even better than you could have imagined originally.
So true. It's when you start the journey, you start uncovering all of the nuance and exceptions that you need to account for, right? So those are great lessons, and I appreciate the timing too. That's a great. Hey, Wilson, any lessons learned from your perspective that you'd like to share?
Many lessons. I want to underline Stephanie's data quality, data comments, like for instance, right now, we're finding that we don't really have good address management, and so we're trying to shoehorn an old process into new processes, and it's not working great. And so, we're having to reinvent things that aren't really part of what we're doing in Salesforce. That's more or less an Esri function in our opinion. So, how do we, you find that, just by trying to do one thing in Salesforce or in some other mainstream system, it means you have to reach back and fix something else. And so it's just you're always unpeeling an onion, it seems, and that's great. I mean, but this is a reason, that sometimes it takes 9 months instead of 6 months to do something. I would say, one thing we've learned is we don't want to let the quest for perfection stand in the way of progress. And sometimes we just have to take a step. And we implemented our Parks and Rec system. We have a Parks and Rec management system we implemented in Salesforce that uses accounts and contacts and a bunch of custom code and everything. And if I'm sure that some of you are aware that there is a Parks and Rec management system that more or less stopped support a couple of years ago, and everyone had to scramble and go to something else. And we decided that we were going to go all in on Salesforce. So there was a necessity there that we had to get out of the old system and into the new system. And we had some missteps, and the things we did were not perfect, and our citizens didn't like them in all instances, but we persisted, and we were flexible, and we were able to make changes and make improvements. And we're in a much better position now than we ever have been. So it's just, you just got to take a step sometimes.
I love that. Just take a step. Great. Okay, we're going to go into funding, and then we're going to talk about what's next. I want to hear all of your amazing plans for what else you're going to do after that. But let's talk funding really quick. So how have you funded this type of work? And does ARPA money play into this? I know that's a big hot topic with a lot of governments receiving funds. So I'm going to ask Wilmington. I don't know if Stephanie or Derek want to take this one.
I'll take this one.
Okay, great.
So Wilmington 311 is a major priority for the city. We consider it a vital part of our operations. So we fund it through our general operational budget. So it's a priority. We make room for it. Now, granted, if there are any larger capital purchases, we capitalize them, but larger software purchases, we capitalize them. But for the most part, we have not needed to leverage any grant funding. We have not needed to, make any huge sacrifices in our budget in order to make this work. It's just a part of our operations now.
That's great. That's great. Carolyn, any comments on funding?
Yeah, Wilson, you want to take that one?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
For sure. Yeah.
I think a lot like Wilmington, our licensing is covered by our operational budget currently, because it is deemed important, and 301 is certainly positioned in the center of our organization and considered at the top to be a top level priority for the organization. We do have special efforts like the Parks and Rec management system and a public works effort that we had early on that were funded from capital projects, which were council approved efforts. We haven't really looked at the ARPA funding, but I could certainly make arguments for what we've done in response to the pandemic and what have you to make some pretty strong arguments for utilizing some of that funding too. But we have to weigh it against the other efforts that we have across the town, and if we are being funded largely through operational budgeting, there's less of a need to kind of do that. We're also looking at, we're starting to kind of figure out how we interact with 911 and how public safety plays into things. So there might be opportunities there for 911 funding as well, depending on how we lay it. I know there's very specific requirements around that too. So
all sorts of 3 numbers, 988 coming into play too. So Carolyn, I forgot, there's one best practice that you actually mentioned to me the other day around adoption. And can you talk about how you have led the charge in investing in tools and employees and getting them, a little bit more interested in Salesforce than just being an end user, and how that's impacted you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we very much have a mentality here, particularly within our research and development group, but definitely sprinkled throughout town, is that when we put our people first, the technology follows and we get much higher success. And so starting very small with use cases and understanding pain points, walking alongside of them and helping to orchestrate innovation instead of being the central source for innovation to trickle out in an overhaul a process or a department has really been key to our adoption. I think many of you, I'm sure, experience that folks who work in local government have been there for decades. And a lot of the processes that we're unwinding or trying to better match and improve with technologies were processes that they themselves built years ago. And in many ways are rightfully still working because they're still getting their job done at the end of the day. And so I think having more of a heart and not just thinking with our brains and technical solutions is really key. And understanding and being respectful of the ripeness of a situation to be overhauled and adopted is very critical too. Sometimes, I think about how Wilson mentioned our 911 center and how our 311 and 911 wasn't, we were aware that at some point they needed to collaborate more because it's very similar in nature what we do. But because of the pandemic, we had this gift of working more closely alongside with our 911 center in a very quick manner, right? Because we just need to help people, keep them safe and be able to communicate information. And so, the pandemic's been terrible in so many ways, but having the gift of that opportunity and now to be at a place where we can understand how they dispatch, the systems that they're using, how they prioritize or classify stuff, and what can we learn from that in our non-emergency operations, and really see each other as an extension of each other and have more of this like unified communications approach is really interesting. And when I think about what's next, that kind of plays into it. And none of that really would have been possible if we didn't first think about the people involved who have made our services so great and given the reputation that we have. And, the technology tools that we have are so critical to it, but certainly secondary when we think about people being our most important resource and finding solutions that fit what they're talking about doing or needing to do by virtue of their position.
So powerful. I just really wanted to make sure we heard that today. That was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, we heard a little bit about what's next. Y'all are working with 911, non-emergency, emergency. Stephanie or Derek, anything you could share about what's next for Wilmington on this journey?
So next, we are developing a new land use department in our city government next year. We've had for years our building permit process has been stretched across 4 different departments who are not under the same leadership. So we've had, it hasn't been an easy process for the citizenry. It hasn't been an easy process for the city. So we're essentially taking all of those functions and putting them under one roof. So along with that, we are looking, as Dominic knows, at instituting a new permitting system. Since right now it's paper. It's drop it off, it's email. So hopefully a tracking system for permits. As far as Wilmington 311 goes, bringing in some of our smaller offices that are not currently participating, probably looping in our FOIA system so we can better track those, maybe our hiring system as well. But in general, what's next is just continually improving our processes and using the data to examine how we're doing and using it to drive our policy decisions.
Great. Any final comments, Derek? Go for it.
And to build on what Stephanie has already said, here in Public Works, me and my team, what we're looking at is mobile apps. And possibly moving to, implementing a mobile app so that individuals can also reach out to us that way by phone and still, like I said at the beginning, on the go. On top of that, 70,000 to 80,000 residents inside City of Wilmington borders. We have roughly 38,000 water customers some of those individuals live outside of the city limits.
Hmm.
And so, for example, the water main break that we experienced not too long ago, it affected some individuals outside of the city limits. So an app, we're thinking would benefit. So we are having discussions about that now, and how that could actually work and fit into Salesforce.
Love that. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Stephanie, Carolyn, Wilson. Really appreciate your commentary and just me being able to ask you guys all these questions. I think all the folks got a lot out of this. I'm gonna turn it back over to Courtney to take us home, but just thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Trevor. I'm just gonna go back to share a few final thoughts. And if folks have questions in the audience, please raise your hand. We do have a few minutes, happy to take them. I just wanted to, at a high level, talk a little bit about the themes that we heard from these two fantastic groups of municipal leaders. One is this theme of just residents wanting to be able to engage with government differently. You know, there are some residents who are always going to want to be able to call someone, but there are residents now who we know want to be able to chat or text, use an app to communicate with government, and being able to implement tools that help you differentiate how people can engage. I love the story about starting in public works, because I do believe that innovation can start in any place in a city and town. And I want to encourage folks on the phone who are, you know, maybe representing smaller towns in Rhode Island to think, you know, this doesn't have to be a big implementation. It can start at a very small local level. It can start with one use case in one department. When you hear about permitting or Parks and Rec or Public Works, whatever your pain point is, the place where you want to make improvements, you could start there and then grow over time. We heard a lot about workflow automation that allows us to work across siloed places of government, but also give you as leaders a chance to understand where your pain points are and bring more transparency into government and help you to improve over time. And again, this lastly around this idea of working across silos and being more efficient, being able to do more with fewer people or doing more with the people that you have gives you a chance to enable teamwork in a different way. So with that, I also just wanted to say to folks that, you know, there is a team at Salesforce that is available to cities and towns across the state of Rhode Island, no matter how big or small you are. And so Dominic Falco and Mike Berry are your account managers here. I'm happy to take the lead at connecting you to the right people. But if you're just interested in having a conversation about how you might consider some of the transformational efforts that you heard about today, I think the team would love to have those conversations with you, and they have partners available to help you with that also. So you're not in it alone, but if you're interested in improving your citizen experience and taking on the start of a transformation journey, there are resources available to you that can just start, you know, as conversations and help you think what is possible. And so I'll leave my contact up here as we close. Please be in touch if there's anything that the team can do for you. So with that, Jen, that's what we have for the group today, unless there's any questions or anything else you were hoping we could cover.
I just would love to be able to open it up for questions, see if anybody has any. And one question that kind of occurred to me, knowing our state like we do here at the League, is there any kind of floor to what like the bare minimum a community would have to really start thinking about digital transformation? Because we know that there's, you know, Rhode Island has some small communities, and some towns don't even have an IT person. So just, you know, even envisioning what's possible, how would that work for you guys?
Ooh, I would love to start answering that question. Certainly won't be the only one to weigh on it, I'm sure, but I am not a technologist. I have a PR background and started working with the town doing communications. And Wilson has been with the organization for about as long and has the exact opposite background. And so I will say, that we are often reminded in R&D that the people who wrote the alphabet could not read. And so you do not have to be a technologist to use technology. And I think having that when we go to talk to people, especially from like a change management perspective, we always tell them, you do what you do. We're just asking you to do it in a different place or in a different space, and hoping that to marry kind of what they do best with technology that's easy to use and feels approachable is really important to us.
Awesome. And I would invite Dominic Falco is the account executive who covers the smaller cities or towns in Rhode Island. Anything, Dom, you would add to that?
Yeah, thanks. No, there's no minimum. I think Wilmington is a great example of that. I think they started originally with, I think, 3 licenses for folks that were in a contact center, specifically in public works. And then once we started getting traction there, other departments start kind of saying, hey, you know, what are you guys doing? Hey, could Salesforce work with this? And then slowly we started to spread. So yeah, today it's a 311. And when we were starting and building, we kind of considered it like a 311 light. So as you start to, you know, build, add use cases, and it just kind of grows, and then all of a sudden you turn around and you've got a great little tool there. So no minimums, no maximums too.
And you know, the team does have partners that can come in, especially for towns that don't have, you know, a bench of technologists to help on an implementation. You know, there are small partners that can come in and help get you started. And then, you know, as Carolyn said, the tools are designed to be able to be maintained by people who don't have deep technology understanding. So you can do some of that work over time.
Nice.
Yeah, the cloud is your friend. I mean, this is the use case for the cloud. You don't have an IT department. You need to be able to do this stuff. It's highly, you know, it's highly configurable and usable by people who aren't IT experts. And this is the benefit of using not just Salesforce, but any cloud platform, honestly.
Wilson,
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
no, I was just going to say that's a great point, Wilson. As Courtney mentioned at the beginning of the call, you know, Salesforce was able to rally to support the state of Rhode Island during the COVID crisis. And since the solution is delivered as a service out of the cloud, no one had to actually be in the same room. So we didn't have to worry about what data center are we building this in, what hardware are we putting it on. It's delivered as a service. So you don't have that capital outlay of hardware and infrastructure that you would have with traditional IT solutions that your city or town may have been looking at in the past. And that ultimately kind of breaks down those barriers of, you know, having that sophisticated or large IT staff to roll one of these solutions out. Everything is done collaboratively, remotely. And the example that Courtney pointed out at the beginning of the call regarding how we helped the state of Rhode Island in the COVID crisis is a great example of that. And welcome to share further details on how we accomplish that one-on-one with anybody on the call.
And one thing I'll just plug too is that we've made a huge investment in citizen accessibility to training. So there's a site called trailhead.com. Anybody, literally anybody, can go and learn about a wide variety of topics with Salesforce. So from basic to advanced use cases, it really covers everything. So if you're like, I'm not even sure I want to start with a handful of licenses, start with Trailhead, get, you know, see what you can accomplish. And you'll, you know, if you, you know, making a little bit of investment there will hopefully prove it out to you that, hey, we can start with 3 people or 2 or 3 people and get something going. So just want to plug that resource completely free out there as well.
Great. And did you say that was trailhead.com?
Correct.
All right, I'll enter it in the chat in case people want a link to that. Any other questions from our audience? You can either raise your hand or take your mic off mute. Feel free. Okay, not seeing any hands. Therefore, I will thank this lovely group for joining us today. Thank you to Salesforce, of course, and our municipal colleagues in North Carolina and Delaware. We appreciate you taking the time to share with us what you've learned through this process and how we might help Rhode Island communities through their own digital transformations. So I had recording this session. I will share it out to other folks who may not have been able to attend. And if you have any questions or didn't catch somebody's contact information, please let me know and I'm more than happy to connect you. All right.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for
Thank
coordinating this. Good
you.
to see everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care now.
Thank you.